Imagine walking into a room where a conversation is already underway. Nothing dramatic happens. No one turns to stare. But within seconds, you feel it. A subtle pause. A slight shift in posture. A sentence that trails off unfinished. You haven't spoken a single word. Yet something in the atmosphere has already changed. You might spend the rest of the evening wondering what you did wrong, replaying your entrance, searching for the misstep. But what if the shift had nothing to do with anything you did, and everything to do with who you are? Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychiatrist, spent his life mapping the invisible architecture of the human psyche. He believed that each of us carries something far more tangible than mere personality, a kind of psychological field, shaped by every joy we've felt, every wound we've carried, and every shadow we've refused to acknowledge. This field doesn't announce itself. It doesn't try to impress or intimidate. It simply exists, radiating from us like heat from stone. And here's what Jung discovered that most people never consider. When you begin the work of becoming real, when you stop performing and start integrating the parts of yourself you once hid, that field changes. It deepens. It clarifies. And without your permission, without your awareness, it begins to press gently against the unhealed places in everyone around you. You become a mirror, not a cruel one, not a judging one, just an honest one. And for people who have spent years constructing careful facades, an honest mirror can feel like the most threatening thing in the world. In this video, we're going to explore 13 subtle signs that your psychological presence may quietly unsettle others, seen through the lens of Jung's deepest insights. If you've ever felt like you don't quite fit, like your silence carries weight, or like your honesty creates distance you never intended, stay with me until the end. You might discover that what makes you difficult to be around is also what makes you impossible to forget. Sign 1. The weight of your words. You've probably heard it before, usually delivered with a nervous laugh or an apologetic shrug. You're so intense. Not because you raised your voice, not because you imposed your opinions, sometimes simply because you asked a question that landed differently, a question that peeled back the polite surface and touched something real. You're at a dinner table where everyone is trading comfortable complaints about work, about traffic, about the weather. Someone mentions they're exhausted. Everyone nods, offers the usual sympathies, and then you ask, quietly, genuinely, what part of your life are you running from when you stay that busy? The silence that follows isn't empty. It's thick. It's charged. Because your question didn't land in the space of casual conversation. It landed in the space where people bury the questions they're afraid to ask themselves. I once knew a man named Marcus who worked in a large corporate office. Marcus wasn't loud. He wasn't confrontational. But during team meetings, when everyone else offered safe opinions, Marcus would sometimes say things like, "I hear what you're saying, but does that actually align with what we know is true?" Nothing aggressive, just honest. Over time, Marcus noticed that his presence alone seemed to change the temperature of the room. People became more careful around him. They checked their words before speaking. Some actively avoided sitting near him. Jung wrote something that explains Marcus's experience perfectly. He said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." When you speak from a place of genuine self-awareness, you're not just exchanging information. You're introducing a catalyst. Your words carry frequencies most conversations are designed to suppress. People who have built their lives on avoidance will feel that frequency as pressure. They'll call it intensity because they lack the vocabulary to describe the discomfort of being seen. Here's the question you might ask yourself next time someone calls you too intense. Were you actually being aggressive, or were you simply being real in a space designed for performance? The answer matters more than you think. Sign 2. The power of your quiet. If your words sometimes carry unexpected weight, your silence can carry even more. You've probably experienced this. You're in a group conversation, saying very little, simply listening. You're not judging, you're not analyzing, you're just present. And slowly, subtly, you notice the person speaking becoming less comfortable. They start filling the silence with extra words, extra explanations, extra justifications for things that needed no justification. They laugh at their own jokes a beat too long. They check their phone. They look anywhere but at you. What's happening here isn't about you. It's about what your silence creates, a space of reflection. Jung observed that human beings will do almost anything to avoid sitting alone with their own thoughts. He wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." In normal conversation, words function like noise-canceling headphones. They drown out the quiet whispers of self-doubt, unexamined fear, and unrealized potential. But when you fall silent, truly silent, and simply listen, you remove that buffer. The other person is suddenly left with their own voice, echoing in an empty room. Your silence becomes like clear water. When the water is still, everything above it is reflected perfectly. The person across from you isn't just talking to you anymore. They're talking to themselves through you. And if they're not ready for that encounter, if they've spent years avoiding the reflection, your silence will feel like exposure. A simple practice. Next time you're in conversation, after someone finishes speaking, wait 1 full second before responding. Just 1. Notice what happens in that second. Often the other person will start speaking again, and this time they'll say what they really meant. That tiny pause, that sliver of silence, creates a doorway. And if you've ever noticed people rushing to fill your silences, you already know your quiet carries more power than most people's words. Sign 3. The depth of your attention. There's something about the way you look at people when they speak. You probably don't think about it. You're just paying attention. But attention, real attention, is rare. Most eye contact in modern life is performative. Brief glances, polite nods, the simulation of listening while the mind wanders to dinner plans or unread messages. But when you truly look at someone, when your gaze rests on them without flinching, without performing, something shifts. You may have noticed people looking away from you mid-sentence. They'll glance down at their hands, suddenly fascinated by their own fingers. They'll become absorbed in straightening a sleeve or adjusting a collar. They'll smile quickly, then look past your shoulder as if something more interesting just appeared. In Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, there's a recurring tension around Raskolnikov's inability to withstand the calm gaze of certain characters. It's not that they accuse him, they say nothing, but their eyes, steady and present, seem to penetrate every mask he wears. Jung would recognize this dynamic immediately. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." When someone looks away from your gaze, they're often not reacting to judgment in your eyes. They're reacting to the sudden clarity of being truly seen. And if they're carrying something unexamined, that clarity can feel unbearable. Think of your gaze not as something you do, but as something you offer. Most people spend their lives looking but never seeing. When you offer the gift of genuine attention, some will receive it as a blessing. Others will experience it as an intrusion. The difference tells you everything about their inner state. Sign 4. The defensiveness you never asked for. Have you ever entered a room or joined a conversation and immediately sensed a shift toward defensiveness? No one has said anything confrontational. No criticism has been offered. Yet suddenly people are explaining themselves, justifying choices no one questioned, defending positions no one attacked. I know some people might disagree with this, but I've actually thought about this a lot, so before you say anything, let me explain. This defensiveness isn't random. It's a reaction to something your presence activates. Jung described the unconscious as a living entity within each person, filled with content we've chosen not to see. Fears, insecurities, denied ambitions, unprocessed shame. These unconscious elements remain quiet as long as everything around us feels predictable and surface level. But when someone with genuine psychological presence enters the field, those buried elements stir. They sense the proximity of awareness. They begin to surface. The defensiveness you encounter is often not about you at all. It's about what your presence represents, the possibility of being truly known. People who are uncertain about their own choices, their own identities, their own worth, will feel that uncertainty amplify when you're near, not because you're judging them, but because your groundedness creates contrast. And contrast reveals what they've been trying to hide from themselves. When someone becomes defensive around you, the most powerful response is not to shrink, not to over-explain, not to soften yourself to make them comfortable. Simply remain steady. Let your calm be the container for their discomfort. Over time, some people will relax into that container. Others will keep their distance. Both outcomes are acceptable. Sign 5. Your radar for performance. At some point in your life, you began noticing something subtle. You could tell when someone was performing. Not in a malicious way, just performing the version of themselves they thought others wanted to see. You started seeing the gap between the smile and the eyes, between the confident words and the hesitant posture, between the carefully constructed story and the truth leaking through the edges. This isn't a skill you learned. It's a sensitivity that developed as you became more honest with yourself. Jung called the performed self the persona, the mask we wear to navigate social expectations. He wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is." The persona isn't evil, it's functional. It helps us move through the world without constant exposure. But when someone wears their persona too long, they begin to forget there's anything underneath. Your ability to sense these masks isn't a superpower you asked for. It's a natural consequence of doing your own inner work. When you've spent time in the basement of your own psyche, you recognize when someone else is locked in theirs. You see the subtle tells, the laugh that comes a moment too late, the anecdote that doesn't quite align, the sudden change of subject when conversation edges towards something real. The temptation when you see these masks is to tear them off, to expose, to confront. But Jung offers a wiser approach. Understanding the mask doesn't mean destroying it. It means holding compassionate awareness that behind every persona is a human being afraid of being unacceptable. Your gift isn't the ability to see through people. It's the ability to see them fully and still offer space. One small practice, tomorrow morning, before you interact with anyone. Pause for 10 seconds and remind yourself to be slightly more real than feels comfortable. Not dramatically real, just 1 degree more authentic than your default. Watch how the world responds. You'll be surprised how often people relax when you give them permission to drop their own masks by dropping yours first. Sign 6. The comparisons you never invited. Here's something you've probably noticed but never named. People compare themselves to you. Not always consciously, not always unkindly, but consistently. You see it in the way they mention your accomplishments while diminishing their own, or the way they joke about being lazy next to your discipline, or the way they suddenly become competitive about things that never seemed competitive before. Jung understood this dynamic intimately. He recognized that when someone encounters a person living with greater self-awareness, something stirs in their unconscious, a recognition of their own unlived potential. They see in you a version of what they could become if they did the work. And that recognition creates a complex emotional response. Admiration mixed with resentment. Inspiration mixed with inadequacy. Think of Katherine Johnson, the NASA mathematician, whose calculations made space travel possible. Johnson lived with a quiet certainty about her abilities that was neither arrogant nor self-deprecating. She simply knew what she could do, and did it. Her colleagues couldn't help but compare themselves to her. Some inspired to work harder, others made uncomfortable by the gap between her self-possession and their own doubt. Johnson didn't create that comparison. Her presence merely revealed it. The brain is wired for social comparison. It's an ancient survival mechanism that constantly evaluates our standing relative to others. When you encounter someone who embodies qualities you secretly want, confidence, clarity, peace, your brain automatically measures the distance. If that distance feels too great, if the gap between who you are and who you could be seems unbridgeable, the response is often not inspiration, but avoidance. Distance, defensiveness. So when you notice people becoming subtly competitive or strangely distant, don't automatically assume you've done something wrong. You may simply be functioning as a mirror. And according to Jung, there's no mirror more unsettling than the one that shows us our own potential. Sign 7. The truths you accidentally reveal. This is the deeper layer of what we've been discussing. Your presence doesn't just invite comparison, it invites confrontation with truth. Not because you're a truth teller in the obvious sense, not because you walk around delivering uncomfortable messages, but because the way you exist, the groundedness you carry, creates a field where denial becomes harder to maintain. Jung wrote something that still stops me when I read it. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Enlightenment, in Jung's view, isn't about accumulating positive thoughts. It's about having the courage to face what you've hidden. Your presence, if you've done this work yourself, becomes an invitation for others to do the same. An invitation, not a demand. But even an invitation can feel threatening when you're not ready to open the door. Consider the myth of Oedipus, not the simplified version about killing his father and marrying his mother, but the deeper story about a man who spent his life trying to outrun a prophecy. Every step he took to avoid his fate actually moved him closer to it. The tragedy isn't that the prophecy came true. It's that Oedipus had to spend years in denial before he could finally see what had been true all along. Jung saw in this myth a perfect metaphor for the human condition. We all carry truths we aren't ready to face. And we all spend tremendous energy constructing lives that keep those truths at bay. When you enter someone's life with genuine self-possession, you become a potential catalyst for their awakening. That doesn't mean you're responsible for their growth. It doesn't mean you should push or prod. It simply means your presence, by being real, makes unreality harder to sustain. Some people will thank you for this, eventually. Others will avoid you forever. Neither response is within your control. If you're still with me, take a moment, just a breath. Let yourself feel what's arising. When was the last time you recognized a truth about yourself that you'd spent years avoiding? That recognition, uncomfortable as it was, marked the moment you became more real. Sign 8. The opening and the withdrawal. Here's a pattern you've probably experienced more than once. You're in a conversation that starts normally, even casually. Then, something shifts. The other person begins to open up. Really open up. They share fears they've never voiced, doubts they've never admitted, dreams they've never spoken aloud. The conversation feels sacred, like walking through a door into someone's hidden room. And then, days or weeks later, they withdraw. Messages go unanswered. Invitations are declined. The warmth you felt becomes distance. Jung understood this pattern deeply. He wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Sometimes a single honest conversation transforms something in the other person. Not because of anything you said, but because of the space you created. They touched parts of themselves they'd kept locked away. They felt, perhaps for the first time, what it might be like to be truly known. And then the fear set in. Opening up creates vulnerability. Vulnerability, if you're not accustomed to it, can feel like standing naked in a crowded square. The natural response, after such exposure, is to retreat, to rebuild the walls, to re-establish distance, to convince yourself that the opening was a mistake. The withdrawal you experience often has nothing to do with you, and everything to do with the other person's inability to integrate the depth they touched. This doesn't make the withdrawal less painful. It just makes it more understandable. From a Jungian perspective, these moments aren't signs of failure. They're signs that something real occurred. Real connection always stirs the depths, and the depths, once stirred, take time to settle. Sometimes the person who withdraws will return months or years later, ready to continue the conversation. Sometimes they won't. Your role is simply to remain who you are, open but not grasping, available but not desperate. Sign 9. The threat you pose to control. There's a specific kind of person who will find your presence particularly uncomfortable. The one who needs to control. Not control in the obvious tyrannical sense, though sometimes that too, but control in the subtle sense. The need to manage how others perceive them, to orchestrate interactions, to maintain the upper hand in every dynamic. These people have built their security on predictability, and you, simply by being self-contained, introduce unpredictability. You've probably encountered this at work, in families, in social groups. Someone tries to provoke a reaction from you, a defense, an apology, a concession, and you simply don't react, not because you're suppressing anything, but because their provocation doesn't land. It hits your boundary and dissolves. And in that moment, something in them shifts. They become agitated, they try harder, they escalate, and still you remain steady. Jung had a phrase for this dynamic. He said, where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking. People who operate from will to power need others to play predictable roles. They need the anxious employee, the appeasing partner, the intimidated acquaintance. When you refuse these roles, not through rebellion, but through simple self-possession, their entire system of control encounters something it can't manage. This doesn't require confrontation. In fact, confrontation often feeds the dynamic. What starves it is your refusal to participate. Your calm, your boundaries, your willingness to be exactly who you are without apology or explanation. These are more destabilizing to controlling personalities than any argument could be. If you're dealing with someone like this, here's a simple practice. Speak slowly, pause before responding. Don't rush to fill silence. Let them experience the discomfort of not being able to predict you. Your steadiness isn't aggression. It's simply the freedom of a mind that belongs to itself. Sign 10. The projections you absorb. Have you ever been told who you are by someone who clearly didn't know you? The accusations that felt like they came from nowhere. The labels that described someone else entirely. The assumptions about your motives that bore no relation to your inner experience. If you've lived any length of time as a self-aware person, you've accumulated a collection of these misreadings. Jung gave this phenomenon a name: projection. It's the unconscious process by which people attribute their own disowned qualities to someone else. The anger they can't acknowledge becomes your hostility. The insecurity they won't face becomes your arrogance. The desire they've repressed becomes your manipulation. Imagine someone wearing smudged glasses. They look at you and see blurry shapes, distorted colors. They might describe you as fuzzy or misshapen. But the problem isn't you. It's the lens. Projection works exactly like this. The other person's unexamined inner content acts as a filter, coloring everything they perceive. When they describe you, they're often describing themselves. Jung wrote, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge. Judgment is easier than self-reflection. Projection is easier than ownership." When someone projects onto you, they're taking the easy path, externalizing what they can't bear to see within. The danger here is that you might start believing their projections. If enough people call you cold, you might wonder if you're actually cold. If enough people accuse you of arrogance, you might search yourself for hidden arrogance. This is the trap. The only defense is deep self-knowledge. When you know who you are, not who you hope to be, not who you fear you might be, but who you actually are, projections lose their power. They slide off like water. You don't need to correct every misperception. You only need to remain clear about your own truth. Sign 11. The trust you never earned. Here's the paradox. The same presence that makes some people uncomfortable makes others open up completely. Complete strangers, people who've known you for minutes, begin sharing things they've never told anyone. You sit next to someone on a plane, exchange a few pleasantries, and within an hour you know about their divorce, their fears about aging, their secret dream of starting a business. And they always say the same thing. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. I remember a woman named Elena who worked as a bartender during graduate school. She told me that customers would routinely share their deepest struggles with her: marital problems, financial stress, existential dread. Elena wasn't a therapist. She wasn't particularly chatty. But something about her presence made people feel safe. She listened without judgment, asked simple questions, and created space for whatever wanted to emerge. From Jung's perspective, this isn't mysterious. When you've done your own inner work, you carry a frequency of acceptance. Not the performative acceptance of someone trying to be non-judgmental, but the genuine acceptance of someone who knows their own darkness and isn't threatened by yours. People sense this instantly. They may not have words for it, but they feel it. They know, on some primal level, that you won't recoil from their truth. Jung wrote, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Your listening has meaning because it comes from a place of genuine curiosity rather than social obligation. You're not waiting for your turn to speak. You're not preparing your response. You're simply present. In a world where most conversations are transactions, your presence feels like a gift. This is influence of the deepest kind, not the influence of authority or expertise, but the influence of genuine human connection. If you've ever wondered why strangers trust you, this is why. Not because you're charming or impressive, because you're real. Sign 12. The atmosphere you read without trying. By now, you've probably noticed something else about yourself. You walk into a room and immediately sense its emotional temperature. Not through anything obvious. No one's arguing. No one's crying. But through something subtler. The way people hold their bodies. The quality of the silence. The tension beneath the smiles. You know within seconds whether this space is safe or strained, whether the people here are genuine or performing. This isn't psychic ability. It's sensitivity developed through self-awareness. When you've learned to read your own inner states, you naturally become attuned to the inner states of others. You notice the micro-expressions, the vocal tones, the subtle shifts in energy that most people miss. Think of it like learning a language. Most people speak the language of surface, weather, work, weekend plans, but you've learned a deeper dialect, the language of unspoken emotion. You hear what's not being said. You feel what's being suppressed. And this sensitivity, while valuable, can also be exhausting. Because once you sense the atmosphere, you can't unsense it. You carry the weight of awareness. Jung understood this burden. He wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. Your ability to read rooms comes from your willingness to read yourself. You've sat with your own discomfort long enough to recognize it in others. You've faced your own shadows, so you're not blindsided by theirs. This sensitivity has a practical application. When you enter a space that feels heavy, you don't have to fix it. You don't have to call anyone out. Simply be aware. Let your awareness guide your responses. When to speak, when to stay quiet, when to stay, when to leave. Your sensitivity isn't a curse. It's a compass. Sign 13. The differentness you've always carried. We've arrived at the final sign, and perhaps the most personal. If you've recognized yourself in any of what we've discussed, you've probably carried a quiet sense of differentness your entire life. Not a dramatic differentness. Not the kind that demands attention or declares itself. Just a subtle sense that you see things from a slightly different angle. That you feel things others don't seem to feel. That you're walking a path that diverges from the main road. You might have spent years trying to hide this differentness, to blend in, to become someone who fits more easily. And maybe you've succeeded, temporarily. But the differentness always returns. It's not a phase. It's not something you outgrow. It's something you are. Jung called the journey of becoming who you truly are individuation. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Notice he didn't say the goal of a lifetime or the project of a lifetime. He said the privilege, because the path to authenticity, while difficult, is also the only path that leads to genuine fulfillment. Individuation isn't about becoming special or superior. It's about becoming specific. It's about shedding the layers of performance and expectation until what remains is simply you. Not the you others want. Not the you thought you should be, but the you that's been there all along, waiting to be recognized. This path is rarely crowded. Most people choose the comfort of conformity over the uncertainty of authenticity. And that's fine. It's their choice. But if you're on the individuation path, you'll often feel like you're walking alone. Not because no one else is walking, but because each person's path is unique. You can't walk someone else's journey, and they can't walk yours. The differentness you feel isn't a sign that something's wrong with you. It's a sign that something's right. You're not supposed to fit perfectly into a world that rewards pretending. Your discomfort with performance, your sensitivity to truth, your inability to stay on the surface, these aren't flaws to overcome. They're evidence that you're becoming real. A simple practice for days when the differentness feels heavy. Spend a few minutes in quiet observation of your own thoughts. Don't judge them. Don't try to change them. Just notice. Ask yourself gently, what part of me is asking to be heard right now? The answer may not come immediately, but the act of asking, of turning toward yourself with curiosity rather than criticism, is itself a step on the path. Conclusion. So here we are, at the end of this exploration. You've spent the last hour or so considering 13 ways your presence might affect others. The intensity some can't handle. The silence that makes people uncomfortable. The gaze that feels like exposure. The authenticity that threatens every mask. And maybe as we've moved through these signs, you've arrived at a different understanding than you expected. Maybe the question isn't what's wrong with me that makes people uncomfortable. Maybe the question is what's right with me that I can't pretend anymore. Jung believed that the goal of human development isn't perfection, it's wholeness. Not becoming someone without flaws, but becoming someone who can hold all of themselves, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, without flinching. When you achieve even a little of this wholeness, your energy changes. It deepens. It clarifies. And yes, it unsettles people who are still running from themselves. But here's what you need to remember. For every person who looks away uncomfortably, there's someone else who feels, for the first time in years, that they can breathe. For every person who calls you too intense, there's someone who's been waiting their whole life to meet someone real. Your presence is a filter, not a flaw. It separates those who are ready from those who aren't. So if you sometimes feel different, if your silence carries weight, if your honesty creates distance you never intended, don't rush to fix it. Don't shrink yourself to fit smaller rooms. The world doesn't need more people performing comfort. The world needs more people brave enough to be real. And in that realness, in that willingness to be exactly who you are, you offer something rare. Permission. Permission for others to drop their masks, to face their shadows, to begin their own journey toward wholeness. Not because you demand it, because your presence demonstrates that it's possible. If this video has helped you see yourself more clearly, if it's given language to something you've always felt but never named, consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the simplest gift we can offer another person is the reminder that they're not alone in feeling different. And if you want to continue exploring the depths of psychology, of human behavior, of the journey toward becoming real, subscribe. There's more to come, because the path doesn't end here. It never ends. It simply deepens. Thank you for walking this path with me today. However long it takes, whatever distance you have to travel, keep going. The person you're becoming is worth it.